What happens when a single sentence, spoken live, without a script, cuts through studio smiles and polite applause like a blade? "I'm not here to be palatable," Scarlett Johansson said, her voice calm but unyielding, eyes locked across the table. "I'm here to be honest." The audience gasped. Before you go any further, subscribe to Prime Talk, hit like, and comment right now with what you think. Because what unfolded next wasn't just television, it was a collision of power, influence, and conviction that no one in that room could walk away from untouched. The clip replayed later would be dissected frame by frame, but in that moment, inside the studio of The View, time seemed to slow. The lights were bright, almost unforgiving, reflecting off the glossy table where decades of debates had unfolded. Scarlett Johansson sat poised yet alert, the kind of stillness that comes from someone who senses a storm before it breaks. Across from her, Alyssa Farah Griffin held her posture tight, shoulders squared, expression composed in a way that suggested preparation, like she'd anticipated resistance and welcomed it. The conversation hadn't started this way. It never does. Earlier, the energy was warm. Scarlett had been introduced with enthusiastic applause, her name alone enough to spark cheers. She smiled, thanked the audience, and spoke about her latest project, art, storytelling, responsibility. Words flowed easily, the tone thoughtful, reflective. The hosts nodded along, offering praise. It felt safe, comfortable. But comfort doesn't last long on live television. The shift came quietly, almost politely. Alyssa leaned forward, fingers interlaced, her voice measured but sharp at the edges. "Scarlett," she said, "you've spoken openly about social and political issues lately. Some people feel celebrities are overstepping, using fame to shape opinions without real accountability. Do you think Hollywood voices sometimes carry too much influence?" The audience reacted immediately, soft murmurs, a few uneasy laughs. Scarlett blinked once. Just once. She smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "I think caring about the world isn't overstepping," Scarlett replied evenly. "It's participating." A few claps followed. Alyssa nodded, but didn't retreat. "But participation," Alyssa continued, "is different from positioning yourself as a moral guide. Millions listen to you. That kind of influence isn't neutral." The word influence hung heavy in the air. Scarlett straightened slightly, placing her hands flat on the table. "I've never claimed moral authority," she said. "I speak as a citizen, as a woman, as someone paying attention." The camera cut to Whoopi Goldberg, who raised an eyebrow, sensing the direction this was headed. Joy Behar shifted in her chair. Sunny Hostin leaned forward, attentive. Alyssa didn't break eye contact. "But don't you worry that people take your words as instruction rather than opinion?" There it was. The line. Scarlett paused, and in that pause, the studio felt smaller. Hotter. "What worries me," Scarlett said slowly, "is the idea that people should stay quiet just because their voice carries." Applause erupted, louder this time, more confident. Scarlett acknowledged it with a slight nod, but her gaze never left Alyssa. Alyssa inhaled, her jaw tightening almost imperceptibly. "I'm not saying stay quiet," she replied. "I'm saying influence without restraint can be dangerous." Dangerous. The word landed like a challenge. Scarlett's expression changed, not angry, not defensive, but sharpened. "It's interesting," she said, "how often women with opinions are framed as dangerous." A collective gasp rippled through the audience. Someone audibly whispered, "Oh wow." Alyssa's smile stiffened. "This isn't about gender," she said quickly. "It's about responsibility." Scarlett tilted her head slightly. "It always becomes about gender when conviction is questioned selectively." The tension snapped tight. Even the applause felt hesitant now, unsure which side to land on. The studio audience shifted in their seats, sensing history being written in real time. Whoopi leaned forward. "Let's keep it respectful," she said calmly, but her eyes were alert, almost energized. "I am being respectful," Scarlett replied, never raising her voice. "But I won't shrink to make others comfortable." That line drew a louder reaction, applause mixed with stunned silence. Alyssa's hands tightened together. "So what's the line?" Alyssa asked. "Say whatever you want because you're famous?" Scarlett leaned in, her voice lowering, intensifying. "No. Say what you believe because silence helps no one." The cameras zoomed closer, catching the flicker of emotion in Scarlett's eyes. Years of scrutiny, judgment, expectation bubbling just beneath the surface. Alyssa watched her carefully now, no longer just debating, but measuring. Joy tried to interject, but the moment had momentum. "You talk about accountability," Scarlett continued. But accountability shouldn't mean erasure. The audience erupted again, this time divided, some clapping, some stunned into silence. Alyssa opened her mouth, then closed it, recalibrating. Well, she said finally, impact still matters. Scarlett leaned back, folding her arms, her voice calm but resolute. So does courage. The room fell quiet. This wasn't just a disagreement anymore. It was a confrontation rooted in power, voice, and who gets to define the rules of public discourse. And as the tension lingered, thick and unresolved, one thing became clear to everyone watching. This clash was far from over. Because what came next would push both women past their prepared talking points and straight into the raw heart of the debate. The silence that followed Scarlett's last word, courage, was not empty. It was charged, vibrating, as if the studio itself was holding its breath. The applause faded slowly, unevenly, leaving behind an uneasy stillness that felt heavier than any noise. Scarlett Johansson sat back in her chair, arms folded now, not in defense but in resolve. Across from her, Alyssa Farah Griffin exhaled through her nose, eyes fixed, mind clearly racing. This was no longer a polite disagreement wrapped in television decorum. This was personal. Whoopi Goldberg glanced between them, instinctively aware that stepping in too quickly might dull a moment viewers would remember for years. Sunny Hostin adjusted her papers without looking down, her attention locked on the exchange. Joy Behar leaned back, lips parted slightly, as if waiting for the next spark to land. Alyssa broke the silence first. Courage, she repeated, her voice steady but tighter than before. That's a powerful word. But courage without responsibility can turn into recklessness. A ripple moved through the audience. Scarlett's eyes narrowed, not in anger but in focus. She unfolded her arms and leaned forward again, returning to the table as if stepping back into the arena. Who decides what's reckless? Scarlett asked. You. The audience reacted instantly, soft gasps, a few claps cut short by shock. Alyssa blinked, caught off guard by the directness. No, Alyssa replied, choosing her words carefully. The consequences decide. Scarlett nodded slowly, as if acknowledging the point while refusing to yield ground. Then let's talk about consequences, she said. Because the consequence of silence is that nothing changes. That line landed hard. The studio responded with louder applause now, confidence growing among those siding with Scarlett. Alyssa waited it out, her expression unreadable, then leaned forward, matching Scarlett's intensity. But the consequence of unchecked influence, Alyssa said, is misinformation. Oversimplification. People following voices they admire instead of facts. Scarlett let out a small, humorless laugh. You assume admiration replaces intelligence. That's a dangerous assumption. The audience murmured again. Someone in the back shook their head. Someone else nodded emphatically. Sunny finally stepped in, her voice calm but curious. Scarlett, do you think there's ever a moment when using your platform feels heavy? Scarlett's gaze softened slightly as she turned toward Sunny. Every time, she said honestly. But heavy doesn't mean wrong. Alyssa watched closely, then interjected. But doesn't that weight come from knowing people might take your words as truth rather than opinion? Scarlett turned back, her jaw tightening. That weight comes from knowing people expect women to apologize for being outspoken. A collective reaction rolled through the audience, this time unmistakable. Applause burst out louder, longer. Alyssa's posture stiffened. This isn't about women, Alyssa said more sharply now. It's about public trust. Scarlett's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath it. Public trust isn't broken by speaking. It's broken by pretending only certain people deserve a voice. The room felt smaller, hotter. Even the hosts seemed aware they were witnessing a moment that would be replayed endlessly online. Joy Behar finally leaned in. Alyssa, she said, are you saying celebrities should just stick to acting? Alyssa hesitated, and that hesitation spoke volumes. The audience leaned forward as one. I'm saying, Alyssa replied carefully, that expertise matters. That lived experience in policy matters. Scarlett nodded, slow and deliberate. And lived experience as a woman in this country doesn't? That question hit like a drumbeat. The audience audibly reacted, echoing through the studio. Alyssa's eyes widened slightly before narrowing again. I didn't say that, Alyssa replied quickly. But that's what it sounds like, Scarlett said, her voice firm now, emotion rising. That unless someone checks the right boxes, their voice is somehow less valid. Whoopi raised her hand slightly, but even she seemed reluctant to interrupt. This was raw now. Unfiltered. Alyssa leaned back, crossing her arms. So where's the line? She asked. If everyone with a platform speaks on everything, doesn't that drown out informed voices? Scarlett leaned in once more, her eyes intense. The line isn't silence. The line is honesty. The cameras zoomed in, catching the tension etched into both faces. Scarlett's calm intensity. Alyssa's controlled resistance. And honestly, Scarlett continued, her voice dropping slightly, it feels like what you're really saying is that influence makes people uncomfortable when it challenges their worldview. The audience exploded, applause, gasps, even a few cheers before the producers motioned for quiet. Alyssa swallowed, visibly recalibrating again. That's not fair, Alyssa said. I'm questioning power. Scarlett nodded. So am I. That response seemed to land deeper than anything else. For a brief moment, Alyssa looked away, just a fraction of a second, before meeting Scarlett's eyes again. Well, Alyssa said, softer now, power should always be questioned. Scarlett's expression softened too, but only slightly. Agreed, she said. That's why I speak. The room went quiet again, but this silence was different. It wasn't hostile. It was reflective. The audience sensed it. The shift from confrontation toward something more complex, more layered. Sunny nodded thoughtfully. Joy exhaled. Whoopi leaned back, a small smile tugging at her lips. But beneath that fragile calm, something remained unresolved. The core tension about influence, voice, and who gets to shape the narrative still pulsed under the surface. Because this wasn't just a debate between two women at a table. It was a clash between perspectives shaped by entirely different worlds. And as the cameras continued to roll, it became clear that the most intense moment, the one that would define this clash forever, was still waiting to erupt. The calm didn't last. It never does when something fundamental has been exposed. The reflective silence that settled over the table felt fragile, like thin glass stretched over a fire. Scarlett Johansson sat still, her hands resting lightly now, her breathing measured. But inside, the weight of years of scrutiny pressed against her chest. Across from her, Alyssa Farah Griffin shifted again, uncrossing her arms, then placing her hands on the table as if grounding herself. Whatever restraint had entered the room was slipping. The audience sensed it. You could feel them leaning forward, bodies angled toward the table, eyes darting between Scarlett and Alyssa like spectators at the edge of a storm. Alyssa broke the quiet, her voice lower, more personal. Scarlett, let me ask you something directly, she said. Do you ever worry that your platform drowns out voices that don't have your privilege? That question cut deeper than the others. Scarlett inhaled slowly. The camera caught it, the pause, the internal calculation. When she spoke, her voice carried a different texture now. Less defensive. More raw. I worry about that constantly, she admitted. But I worry more about a world where only people with permission get to speak. A murmur rolled through the audience. Alyssa nodded once, acknowledging the honesty, but didn't retreat. Permission isn't the issue, Alyssa replied. Access is. When someone like you speaks, it echoes louder than people who live these realities every day. Scarlett's jaw tightened. And when I amplify those voices, she asked, when I use my platform to point outward instead of inward, does that still count as drowning them out? The question lingered unanswered. Alyssa hesitated, and that hesitation shifted the power in the room. Sunny Hostin leaned forward, sensing the pivot. This feels like it's about responsibility versus restraint, she said. And whether those two things can coexist. Scarlett nodded, grateful for the framing. They have to, she said. Because restraint without responsibility is cowardice. And responsibility without voice is meaningless. The audience reacted strongly, applause swelling, then fading. Alyssa pressed her lips together, absorbing the point but not conceding. But what about misinformation? Alyssa countered. What about moments when celebrities get it wrong? Scarlett didn't flinch. Then we correct it, she said. Publicly. Transparently. Like adults. That drew a sharp reaction, some laughter, some applause. Alyssa shook her head slightly. That sounds ideal, she said. But reality isn't that clean. Scarlett leaned forward again, her eyes intense. Reality is messy because people are messy. That doesn't mean we stop engaging. The tension climbed again, faster now. This wasn't circling anymore. It was accelerating. Joy Behar interjected, half joking but serious underneath. This is getting good, she muttered, earning a nervous laugh from the audience. Alyssa glanced briefly toward Joy, then back to Scarlett. You talk about engagement, she said. But don't you think there's a line where engagement turns into activism, and activism turns into pressure? Scarlett's expression hardened. Pressure is how change happens. That line landed like a spark on dry ground. Alyssa leaned in sharply. And pressure can silence dissent. The audience gasped. Scarlett's eyes flashed. Dissent isn't silence, Scarlett shot back. It's disagreement. And disagreement requires voices on both sides. Alyssa's tone sharpened. Unless one side has a megaphone. Scarlett didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Then maybe the problem isn't the megaphone, she said. Maybe it's who we refuse to hand one to. The reaction was explosive. Applause thundered through the studio, louder than anything before. Some audience members stood briefly before sitting again. The hosts exchanged looks. This was no longer just compelling television. This was combustible. Whoopi finally leaned forward, her voice calm but commanding. All right, she said. Let's bring this back for a second. But Scarlett wasn't finished. I didn't ask for my voice to matter more, she continued, her words flowing now, emotion fully surfacing. I was given visibility. What I do with it is my responsibility, but I won't apologize for using it. Alyssa's eyes locked onto hers. And I won't apologize for questioning power, she replied. Good, Scarlett said immediately. Then we're finally having the same conversation. That stopped Alyssa cold. The audience felt it too, the shift, the recognition. For the first time, Alyssa didn't respond right away. She studied Scarlett, not as an opponent now, but as someone standing firmly inside her own truth. You really believe that? Alyssa said quietly. I do, Scarlett replied just as softly. Because I've spent my entire career being told when to speak, how to speak, and when to stop. The studio went still. Even the cameras seemed to slow. And when I finally speak on my own terms, Scarlett continued, it's framed as dangerous. That tells me everything I need to know. Alyssa exhaled, leaning back slightly. I don't think you're dangerous, she said. I think influence is. Scarlett nodded. So do I, she said. That's why it should never belong to only one kind of person. The applause this time was different. Slower, deeper, less reactive, more thoughtful. Sunny nodded. Joy sighed. Whoopi smiled faintly, sensing the audience processing something bigger than a soundbite. But even as the intensity softened, the clash had reached its peak. The lines had been drawn, crossed, and redrawn in real time. Neither woman had backed down. Neither had won. And somehow, that made the moment even more powerful. Because as the segment edged closer to its end, everyone watching, inside the studio and beyond it, knew this wasn't going to end when the cameras cut. The real fallout was still ahead. The final seconds of the segment arrived quietly, almost deceptively so, like the calm after something seismic has already shifted beneath the surface. Scarlett Johansson sat back in her chair now, her expression composed but changed, as if she had said something she had been carrying for years and finally set it down in public. Alyssa Farah Griffin mirrored her posture, hands folded, eyes thoughtful rather than combative. The fire hadn't disappeared, but it had transformed. Whoopi Goldberg was the first to speak, her voice grounded, reflective. This, she said slowly, gesturing between them, is what it looks like when people actually challenge each other instead of talking past one another. The audience responded with sustained applause. Not explosive this time, but deep and resonant. It wasn't cheering for a winner. It was recognizing the weight of what had just happened. Sunny Hostin nodded. What we're really talking about, she added, is voice versus power. And who gets trusted with it. Scarlett glanced briefly toward Sunny, then back to Alyssa. That's always been the question, she said. And it's one worth being uncomfortable about. Alyssa took a breath, then spoke, her tone noticeably different from earlier, less sharp, more measured. I don't think we resolved everything, she admitted. And maybe we're not supposed to. But I do think these conversations matter more when they're honest. Scarlett nodded once. Agreed. That single word carried more closure than 1,000 rehearsed lines ever could. As the cameras pulled back and the segment wrapped, the audience applauded again. Some standing, others remaining seated but visibly moved. There was no triumphant smile, no theatrical conclusion. Just the lingering sense that something real had occurred, live, unfiltered, and impossible to neatly package. But the view audience was only the beginning. Within minutes of the show ending, clips of the exchange began flooding social media. Short videos of Scarlett's sharpest lines spread rapidly. Silence helps no one. Conviction isn't danger. Influence shouldn't belong to only one kind of person. Each quote took on a life of its own, stripped of context by some, fiercely defended by others. On X, hashtags began trending. One side praised Scarlett for refusing to be diminished, calling the moment a masterclass in calm resistance. Others sided with Alyssa, arguing she had raised necessary questions about accountability and unchecked influence. Comment sections became battlegrounds, long threads dissecting tone, intent, body language, even pauses between words. Media outlets moved fast. Headlines framed the moment as a fiery clash, a tense showdown, a rare unscripted collision. Panel shows replayed the exchange, pausing to analyze facial expressions, voice inflection, power dynamics. Some called it divisive. Others called it overdue. What couldn't be denied was this: people were watching, and people were talking. Scarlett Johansson didn't immediately comment publicly. No tweet. No Instagram post. That silence, too, was dissected. Supporters said she'd already said everything that needed saying. Critics said the conversation shouldn't end there. Alyssa Farah Griffin addressed the moment later that evening, acknowledging the intensity while standing by her point. Questioning power, she said, isn't personal, it's necessary. That statement only fueled further debate. And somewhere between those opposing takes, the real impact of the clash took shape. This wasn't about who won an argument at a table. It was about a larger tension that had been building for years, between celebrity and credibility, influence and accountability, speaking up and being told to stay in line. Scarlett embodied the frustration of being dismissed because of visibility. Alyssa embodied the concern that visibility itself reshapes discourse in unpredictable ways. Neither position vanished when the cameras shut off. What lingered was the discomfort, the unresolved questions, the sense that this conversation didn't belong to just one show or one moment, or even two people. It belonged to anyone who has ever wondered whether their voice was too loud or not loud enough to matter. That's why the moment resonated. Not because it was loud, but because it was real. As the studio lights dimmed and the audience filtered out, some still talking animatedly, others quietly reflective, one truth remained clear. This clash would be remembered not for insults or theatrics, but for forcing viewers to sit with complexity instead of slogans. And now, the conversation passes to you. Did Scarlett Johansson speak with necessary courage? Or did Alyssa Farah Griffin raise the harder, more responsible questions? Was this a moment of empowerment or a warning about influence? Or was it something more complicated than either side wants to admit? Tell us what you think in the comments. We want to hear your perspective. And if you want more explosive, cinematic, and deeply human moments like this, stories that pull you inside the tension and refuse to let go, subscribe to Prime Talk right now. Like the video, share it with someone who loves real debate, and stay with us for the next moment that everyone will be talking about, whether they're ready or not.